The relentless wind, a constant companion in the vast, unforgiving landscape of the late 19th century American West, whipped dust around Elias Vance as he rode. His ranch, a cluster of weathered wood and sun-baked earth, sat isolated beneath an immense sky, a testament to his desire for solitude. Spring had arrived, but the land remained parched, the promise of renewal fragile under the harsh, unwavering sun. Elias, a man carved from the same stoic silence as the land around him, carried the weight of unspoken losses in the slump of his shoulders. His face, etched with lines deeper than his 40 years suggested, rarely softened. He rode the fence line, a monotonous task that suited his nature, his eyes scanning for breaks or stray cattle. The routine was a shield against the ghosts of his past, a predictable rhythm in an unpredictable world. He reached a bend in the meager river that meandered through his property, its banks sparsely dotted with scraggly willows. His horse, old and wise, snorted, shifting uneasily. Elias dismounted, his boots crunching on the dry earth. And then he saw him. A small figure curled awkwardly among the sparse reeds at the water's edge. A boy, no older than 10, his skin the color of worn leather, his dark hair matted with dirt and what looked like dried blood. He was still, frighteningly still, save for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. His clothing, though simple, marked him as native. A jolt ran through Elias. His first instinct was to turn away, to ride back to his ranch and pretend he hadn't seen. The air of the West was thick with suspicion and animosity between settlers and native tribes. To bring a redskin onto his property, especially one found like this, was to invite trouble, perhaps even violence from his neighbors. It was a risk he, a man who valued his solitude above all else, couldn't afford. The boy was an intrusion, a complication he desperately wanted to avoid. But something held him, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in the boy's small hand, a vulnerable innocence in the bruised, still face. Elias stood there, a silent battle raging within him. His ingrained prejudices, years of overheard whispers and fear-mongering tales, clawed at his conscience. Yet beneath the hardened shell, a flicker of something he'd long suppressed stirred, a deep, human empathy. He remembered his own childhood, lost and alone after his family succumbed to the fever. The memory was a dull ache, but it was enough. With a heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his decision, Elias knelt. He checked for a pulse, strong but faint. The boy was alive. Carefully, he gathered the small body into his arms. The boy was lighter than he expected, fragile. He settled him across his horse, a cumbersome but necessary act. As he remounted and turned for the ranch, Elias felt the tremor of his own uncertainty. He was bringing the unknown into his carefully constructed solitude, and for the first time in years, the silence of his ranch felt less like a sanctuary and more like a fragile secret about to be broken. The setting sun cast long, ominous shadows across the land, mirroring the apprehension that now settled deep within him. The interior of Elias's cabin was a study in austere utility, a rough-hewn table, a cot, a stove, and tools hanging on the walls. Now it was also home to a quiet, unfamiliar presence. The boy lay on a makeshift bed of blankets near the crackling fireplace, his breathing still shallow. Elias, awkward and unpracticed in the art of tending to others, cleaned the boy's wounds with practiced hands, the same hands that mended fences and wrangled cattle. He fashioned a crude bandage for a gash on the boy's forehead, his movements stiff, almost clinical. The boy remained mostly unconscious, occasionally moaning softly. Days blurred into a pattern of silent care. Elias fed him thin broth, spooning it carefully between the boy's dry lips. He changed the bandages, his touch surprisingly gentle. The mornings were crisp, the cabin often cold until the fire took hold, while the afternoons brought a warmth that seeped through the single window. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire, the distant lowing of cattle, and the occasional soft rustle of the boy shifting on his blankets. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the boy began to mend. His eyes, when they opened, were dark and intelligent, observing Elias with a cautious curiosity that mirrored Elias's own. He spoke no English, and Elias knew no Sioux. Their communication began with gestures, Elias pointing to water, the boy nodding, Elias offering food, the boy reaching out a hesitant hand. There was an unspoken exchange in these small acts, a tentative bridge forming across the vast chasm of language and culture. Elias, despite his internal struggle, found himself watching the boy. He noticed the way the boy's gaze lingered on the worn leather of his saddle, the glint of his rifle, the methodical way he chopped wood. The boy was taking in everything, a silent scholar of Elias's solitary world. In turn, Elias began to see beyond the initial fear and prejudice. He saw the resilience in the boy's quiet recovery, the surprising strength in his small frame. He even found himself offering the boy a small wooden horse he'd carved years ago, long forgotten in a dusty box. The boy's eyes widened slightly as he took it, a spark of something akin to wonder flickering there. The presence of the boy, though a secret Elias guarded fiercely, began to subtly reshape his routine. He became more watchful, his ears tuned to the distant thud of horses or the faint sound of voices. He took longer, more circuitous routes when riding into town, careful to avoid anyone who might notice something amiss at his ranch. The fear of discovery was a constant hum beneath his skin, intensifying with each passing day. He knew the local ranch hands, rough and quick to judgment, wouldn't hesitate to act if they suspected he was harboring a wild Indian. The thought of their reaction, their inevitable accusations, tightened his jaw. Yet, as the boy grew stronger, a new, unexpected emotion began to mix with his fear, a faint, almost imperceptible protectiveness. The cabin, once a haven of solitude, now felt both burdened by its secret and strangely, subtly less empty. As the days turned into weeks, the boy, whom Elias now simply thought of as the boy, regained his strength. He could walk, help with small chores, and his dark eyes followed Elias with an almost unnerving attentiveness. The silent bond between them, forged in the confines of the cabin, deepened, yet the unspoken anxiety surrounding their situation grew heavier. The isolation of Elias's ranch, once a comfort, now felt like a fragile bubble susceptible to bursting. Elias had to make a trip into the nearest town, Redemption Creek, a dusty cluster of buildings that served as the heart of the surrounding ranches. It was a necessary evil for supplies, but the thought of leaving the boy alone, even for a few hours, filled him with a gnawing unease. He gave the boy firm instructions, mostly through gestures, to stay inside and out of sight. The boy, understanding the gravity in Elias's voice, nodded solemnly. The town itself was a hotbed of idle talk and simmering resentments. In the general store, while haggling over flour and coffee, Elias overheard fragments of conversations that sent a chill down his spine. "Heard some of them redskins been spotted near the big mesa," one rancher grumbled, spitting tobacco juice onto the dusty floor. "Time we organized a proper patrol." Another chimed in. "Seen smoke coming from Old Man Vance's direction. Looked a bit off, like a cook fire. Not his usual chimney." Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. The subtle accusation, the casual assumption of threat, fueled his paranoia. Later, as Elias secured his purchases to his horse, a local patrol rider, a burly man named Jebediah, known for his harsh stance against natives, approached him. "Vance," he drawled, his eyes narrowing slightly, "heard you ain't been to the saloon lately. Keeping to yourself more than usual." "Nee." It wasn't a question, but an observation laced with suspicion. "Just busy with the spring roundup," Elias replied, his voice gruff, his gaze steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Anything unusual out your way? Seen any strays?" Jebediah pressed, his eyes sweeping over Elias's horse and back to his face. Elias met his gaze, his face a mask of indifference. "Only my own livestock, Jebediah. Nothing else." Jebediah grunted, unconvinced, and rode off, leaving Elias with a cold dread settling in his stomach. Back at the ranch, the boy was exactly where Elias had left him, huddled near the window, looking out. Elias felt a wave of relief, quickly followed by a pang of something more complex. The boy's quiet presence had begun to chip away at Elias's hardened exterior. He was no longer just a burden or a secret. He was a vulnerable life Elias had taken responsibility for. The boy, perhaps sensing Elias's renewed anxiety, pointed towards the distant hills. Elias understood. The boy longed for his people, for his tribe. A new conflict emerged within Elias. Should he try to help the boy find his way back, risking exposure and the wrath of his neighbors, or continue to hide him, prolonging a situation that felt increasingly unsustainable? The answer was agonizingly unclear, made more complicated by the subtle, unwelcome truth that he had grown accustomed to the boy's silent company. The afternoon sun beat down, turning the vast prairie into a shimmering expanse of heat and silence. Elias was mending a broken fence post, the rhythmic thud of his hammer echoing faintly in the stillness. The boy, now strong enough to run and explore, was carefully inspecting a lizard near a cluster of rocks, his back to the distant horizon. The familiar, comforting quiet of the ranch settled around them, a deceptive tranquility. Then, a sound. At first, it was a low thrum, barely perceptible, like a distant heartbeat. Elias paused, his hammer frozen in mid-air. He looked up, his brow furrowed, trying to pinpoint its origin. The boy, too, seemed to sense it, his head snapped up, his small body tensing, his eyes wide as he stared eastward. The thrum grew, deepening into a distinct, pulsating rhythm. It wasn't the clatter of horse hooves from a raiding party, nor the sharp report of gunfire. This was something ancient, resonant, and deeply powerful, the unmistakable sound of drums. Not a single drum, but many, a rhythmic chorus that vibrated through the earth itself. It was a sound Elias associated with war, with warnings, with the unpredictable nature of the native tribes. His heart began to pound, a frantic counterpoint to the steady, approaching beat. Panic flared. "Get inside," Elias barked, his voice hoarse, pushing the boy roughly towards the cabin. He instinctively reached for the rifle strapped to his saddle. This was it. They had found the boy. The whispers in town, the wary glances, the fear he had suppressed. It was all coming to fruition. He imagined a horde of warriors, painted for battle, descending upon his small ranch, seeking retribution. But as the sound grew louder, a strange, discordant note began to emerge in Elias's frantic thoughts. The rhythm, while powerful, lacked the frenzied pace of a war drum. It was measured, almost ceremonial, and then, at the crest of the nearest rise, they appeared. A procession. Not warriors, but figures adorned with feathers and intricately woven blankets. Men, women, and children. And at the front a group of drummers, their hands moving with practiced grace, pulling forth the deep, resonant beats that now filled the entire valley. They moved with a deliberate, unhurried pace, their faces serene. In the lead walked an older man, his hair braided with feathers, and beside him an elder woman, her gaze fixed directly on the cabin. Elias lowered his rifle, his mind struggling to reconcile what he saw with what he had expected. No war cries, no weapons brandished in aggression, only the deep, hypnotic throb of the drums, echoing across the barren land, and the silent, purposeful advance of a tribe that had come not with hostility, but with an inexplicable, profound purpose. The boy, who had initially recoiled, now stood beside Elias, his small hand gripping Elias's pant leg, his eyes filled not with fear, but with a mixture of relief and recognition. He began to point, a small, almost imperceptible gesture towards the approaching figures, a silent confirmation that this was his people. The unexpected sight left Elias reeling, a jumble of shock, confusion, and a burgeoning, unsettling wonder. The drumbeats softened as the procession halted a respectful distance from Elias's cabin, yet their resonance still thrummed in the air, a powerful testament to their presence. Elias, still clutching his rifle, felt a strange paralysis. The tribal chief, a man with a quiet dignity etched into his weathered face, stepped forward, accompanied by the elder woman, whose eyes held a deep wisdom. Behind them, members of the tribe stood silently, their gazes curious but not hostile. Through gestures and a few simple, familiar words spoken by the chief, which Elias strained to understand, it became clear this was not a confrontation, but a homecoming. The elder woman, the boy's grandmother, stepped forward, her face creasing into a smile that radiated profound relief. The boy, breaking free from Elias's side, ran to her, disappearing into her embrace. The sight of their reunion, the raw, unfiltered joy, struck Elias with an unexpected force. Then, to Elias's profound surprise, the tribe began to present gifts. A beautifully woven blanket, intricately patterned, a hand-carved pipe, smooth and polished, a small, carefully tanned deerskin pouch filled with dried berries. Each item was offered with a quiet reverence, accompanied by more gestures of gratitude. The drummers, in turn, began to play again, a slow, celebratory rhythm that filled the air with a sense of peace and honor. It wasn't a demand or a challenge, but an outpouring of thanks for the return of their kin. Elias, a man who had built walls around himself his entire life, found them crumbling. The casual prejudices he had harbored, the fear he had nursed, dissolved in the face of this unexpected generosity. He saw not savages, but people, deeply connected, profoundly grateful, the genuine warmth radiating from the tribe. Their evident joy was a stark contrast to the suspicious, often hostile world he was used to. He was suddenly acutely aware of his own weathered clothes, his worn rifle, and the stark simplicity of his ranch. Yet, in their eyes, he saw only respect. Hesitantly, Elias lowered his rifle and leaned it against the cabin wall. It was a small gesture, but a monumental one for him. He met the chief's gaze and, with a nod that felt heavy with new meaning, gestured towards his cabin. "Come," he grunted, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. "You are welcome. Share food." A ripple of surprise, then a murmur of agreement went through the tribe. The chief nodded in return, a gentle smile gracing his lips. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the vast western sky in hues of orange and purple, Elias Vance, the silent rancher, watched as the tribe, still playing their drums softly, began to set up a camp near his ranch, not as invaders, but as guests. The scent of wood smoke mingled with the unfamiliar, comforting aroma of native cooking. In that moment, surrounded by the echoes of ancient drums and the quiet hum of a grateful community, Elias felt a profound shift within himself. The barren lands of his heart, once defined by isolation and mistrust, seemed to open, offering the first fragile tendrils of hope for a future where bridges, not walls, could be built. His solitude was no longer an impenetrable fortress, but a threshold waiting to be crossed.